So as Leonard mentioned, I am the senior librarian of the Los Angeles Public Library's Photo Collection, which is a position I've held for 11 years now. For those of you who are not aware, the Los Angeles Public Library has been collecting photos since the 1940s, so over 70 years now. The focus of our collection is life in Los Angeles, so it is like very broad. I am not particular about, how good a photo is, what the format is, as long as it reflects life in Los Angeles. And certainly, we have photos that go beyond the city borders, which we've acquired over the years. But, the real focus and scope of our collecting is the city of Los Angeles. We have images dating all the way back to the 1850s to the present. We don't actually purchase photos. I have no budget for purchasing collections. All of our photos have come via donation. We estimate we have somewhere between 3 and 4 million photos in the collection. It is an impressive number. It's a little bit misleading, though, in terms of copyright and what we can digitize, which I'll get into a little bit later. But yeah, it is a massive collection, and it's come to us via donation. So because we have so many photos and not as much staff because no archive has as much staff as they should have, we don't actively go out and solicit donations, but they certainly come to us.
Yeah, so we are completely donation based. We recently, 2 weeks ago, accepted 3 truckloads worth of materials that I brought down to the library. It was one of my few visits to Central during this time. So it is an ever growing collection. And I like to think that we do provide a good home. And one of our virtues, because we are a public library, is access. And so what I wanted to do today with everyone is to give a pretty broad overview of the collection. So yes, we have millions of photos, but it's not just one big pot of photos. It's a lot of smaller collections that make up our larger collection. And I think it helps to understand what each of these collections do, because I think it can give context to when you're looking at photos, and you certainly can search the photos on an individual basis, but I do think it helps to understand why we have certain photos that we have and where they came from. And so I wanted to give an overview, and then I was going to go through our online platform, which we call Tessa, which hosts the digital versions of our photo collection, as well as some of the other libraries' photo collection, and to just give you some tips and tricks to hopefully help you navigate and refine your searching a little bit better. So to start with our individual photos, I'm going to start with our Security Pacific National Bank collection. And this was a collection that we acquired in 1981. The bank had started collecting photos in the 1920s and actively collected photos through the 1970s at the time of the donation. And they sought to, much like us, just collect photos that showed the history and growth of Los Angeles. And they used the photos, I don't know exactly why they started collecting photos, but they did use the photos for a variety of reasons. So they would publish historical booklets, many of which we have in our collection at Central Library. They would do maps. They would, if they opened up a branch in a particular community, they might, decorate or have a display of historical photos of that community. So they utilized the photos in many different ways. Local authors and historians would go to them and borrow the photos. So, you see publications that existed long before we ever got the collection, which credit Security Pacific National Bank. And even the local newspapers used this bank collection as a way to get historical photos if they were doing some kind of newspaper article that pertained to it. And so here's just a few samples of the types of things that are in Security Pacific National Bank. So just very representative of just neighborhoods around the cities. And again, just that growth. And so here we have 3rd and Broadway, when it was a sleepy residential part of town. This other photo on the right is believed to be the first aerial view of Los Angeles. It was taken from a hot air balloon by, I believe, the Los Angeles Express newspaper. And what we are looking at is the downtown area and the river, back when the river had a lot of water in it. Here's just a very classic SP&B shot of the Bunker Hill neighborhood in 1890, which again, just this doesn't exist anymore. Here is a livery stable near First Street in 1876. So you can just kind of get a sense of Los Angeles beginnings through this collection. It's also a good collection for kind of major buildings. So, this collection does tend to focus on major commercial districts, downtown, like Hollywood, up Wilshire, as well as some of, really notable commercial buildings. So here's, for example, the Los Angeles Theater, which is still standing. We'll frequently get requests for people looking for interiors of buildings, and those are not as easy to come by as exteriors for obvious reasons. Anybody can, in general, on the street, take a photo of a building from the exterior. So interior photos we have in our collection do tend to be these major buildings. So, when the Los Angeles Theater opened, professional photographers would have gone inside, and we'll have beautiful shots like this on the right. So again, it's just, you're always welcome to ask us and take a look. It does just tend to be very hit or miss if we have interiors of buildings. And I think the question I get asked probably more than any else is, do you have a photo of my house? And I'll frequently respond with, well, if Pick Fair is your house, yes, we have lots of photos of Pick Fair. So the photos of residences we do have, again, do tend to be, kind of, like, the mansions, the movie star homes tend to be what got documented more. Not to say we don't have neighborhood photos. So this one on the right, this is a house in Eagle Rock. And there are other photos of Eagle Rock houses that we have. And, we had somebody did a search for their house and came, they bought this house and found it in our collection and were thrilled and ordered a copy. And I think they have since landmarked this house. So again, residences can be, very hit or miss. You just kind of never know. So, you can take a look. A lot of the photos that we have that have been identified as residential have already been digitized. So you can search for addresses, you can search for streets, you can search for cross streets. There are a number of photos in the collection that we have just listed as unidentified. And so you can always look for unidentified and residence. Residences is the word we use. We don't use houses necessarily. We don't use homes. Residences is the word that we use. And so the Security Pacific National Bank Collection was really shepherded by a gentleman named Victor Plukas. And I think a lot of times with archival collections, it is really, there is a person or a few people who are the driving force behind a collection. And that was Victor Plukas. He was the driving force behind the Security Pacific National Bank Collection. It didn't come with a whole lot of documentation so that we know the provenance of the individual photos. So this collection does tend to be a big gray copyright hole for us. But we do have, some instances where he would write letters soliciting photos. And so what I've come to gather is once Victor Plukas retired, the bank didn't want to deal with the collection anymore. And that's how we came to have the Security Pacific National Bank Collection. So it is a fantastic collection. It gives a pretty good overview, of the history of Los Angeles. It also tends to be, a more of a whitewashed history of it, but it is an incredibly valuable collection. The majority of it has been digitized. I think what has not been are transportation. So that's going to be automobiles and trains. And then a lot of the sports related photos have not been digitized. And even though the collection does span the 20s through the 70s, the strength of the Security Pacific Collection really is the 20s and the 30s. And so kind of along those same lines is our WPA collection. And so this was a project, it was under the Federal Writers Project. And I believe the photos were used in like a WPA Los Angeles guidebook, maybe not all of them. And this is a pretty massive collection, but again, it really tends to be an architectural survey of the city. And here's just a couple of shots. Here's the Richfield building, which used to sit right across the street from Central Library. And it was torn down in 1968 and replaced with the Arco Towers. And then here's just a beautiful shot of our Philippe de Neve branch. That pool and fountains, unfortunately, has not had water in it for a number of years. And I think it's gated off right now. But again, if you're looking for, kind of more well-known buildings throughout Los Angeles in the 1930s, WPA is going to be a pretty good source for that. And just the photos themselves are just really high quality. They were good photographers. Then we have our Ingersoll portrait collection. And this was one of the earlier collections we obtained along with the WPA collection. And Luther Ingersoll was a local historian and he wrote many books. We have them in our collection. He also very obsessively collected portraits of notable Angelenos. And he would collect kind of all different formats. So, glass plates, cabinet cards. He would also just cut out pictures in publications and then post them on a card. So he just culled together, portraits from a wide variety of sources. And, they do tend to be, again, it's, the bankers and the real estate agents and the people that were really, kind of the well-known driving force in Los Angeles early on. This collection is actually one of the ones that has not been heavily digitized. So here are a couple of examples: Aileen Barnsdall and William Workman, which are names that should be familiar. If you don't know who they are, there are definitely places around the city named for them. A lot of the photos from the Ingersoll portrait collection have not been digitized, though. And it's definitely on the to-do list. So if you are looking for photos of prominent Angelenos from, like around the turn of the century into the 1920s, this is something we could search the collection for if you're not finding what you want online. Next up is Shades of LA. And the collections that I've discussed so far, again, are a pretty kind of homogenous white look at the history of the city. And my predecessor, Carolyn Kozo Cole, who oversaw the collection for a number of years, she identified pretty early on that was a problem with the collection. So it geographically did a decent job, but it wasn't capturing the entire city, and it certainly was not reflecting the ethnic diversity of Los Angeles. And so she, in 1991, formed Photo Friends. So that is a nonprofit group that supports the photo collection, and I'm happy to say they're still around. And she launched the Shades of LA project. And what she did is she had, volunteers with Photo Friends and staff, and they would hold photo days around the city, where they would invite people to bring in their family photos. And this is before scanners were really, readily available. And we didn't expect people to actually hand over their precious family photos. And so what the project consisted of was people bringing in their photos, and then we hired photographers to take photos and make copy prints that way. And so this project was wildly successful. It got, I think, nationwide coverage. It has been replicated around the country. The State Library of California did a Shades of California project. The end result of it was, I think, around 7,000 photos. And again, just fills gaps. There are so you have kind of neighborhood photos like this. So we have a theater in Chinatown. Maybe commercial photographers weren't really photographing smaller areas like this. We have the interior of Zellman's in Boyle Heights. Here is one of my favorite photos. This is the Lischey family in front of their home in Watts. And I just love the juxtaposition of the two sisters on either side, and the dad looking a little bit bewildered. And then here's a family in front of their home in Cypress Park. And so the Shades of LA collection is a good resource, if you're looking for like more working class neighborhoods and residences, this might be an option. And so this was the first collection that we digitized. And so this collection is completely online. Excuse me, I think we might have some stragglers, but this is something that can be completely searched. And so it's just, an incredible collection with so much value and gets used. It's still a very high interest. People still write articles about it. And KCET did a mini documentary about it a few years back. So it's just an incredible resource. Now, moving on, we have two newspaper archives in our collection. So one is the Herald Examiner, and this collection dates from the mid-1920s until the newspaper folded in 1989. And just to give you a brief history lesson on Los Angeles newspapers. Once upon a time, there was a newspaper called the Los Angeles Herald. It started in the 1870s. It was an evening paper that by 1922 was owned by William Randolph Hearst. There was also the Los Angeles Examiner. That was a morning newspaper that started in 1903, I think, 1903 or 4, also owned by William Randolph Hearst. In 1962, the two papers merged to become the Herald Examiner, which was published by Hearst until it folded in 1989. So even though the Herald dates back to the 1870s, newspapers routinely did not start saving graphics until the mid-20s. And this is something that I've seen with many newspaper collections all around the country. So what we have in our collection are the photos from the Los Angeles Herald starting in the 20s up to 1962. And then we have the merged Herald Examiner from 62 to 89. USC has the photos from the Examiner starting in the 1920s up to 1962. So if you're doing research and find an photo that ran in the Examiner, you're going to need to go to USC. If it's the Herald, that would be us. So this is by far our biggest collection. I think this one, is over 2 million photos. So, the majority of our, a majority of our collection comes from the Herald. It's kind of every news story that you can think about, from the 20s up through 1989. It was, during the 20s and 30s and 40s, it loved scandal. So the more lurid, the better. So, that's one of the things I'll joke with people. Do you have a photo of my house? And I'll say, well, if a horrible crime was committed at your house or something very newsworthy and scandalous, then yes, the Herald might have covered it. And so here's just a handful of examples. So we have Vivien Leigh accepting her Academy Award. So there's lots of photos and actors and actresses, particularly if they had to go to court for something or if they were at premieres. We don't have really portraits because these are newspaper photos, but events like the Academy Awards, we will have. Here's a Prohibition era photo. Here is a shot, and this is what we will see often with the Herald is where they will write directly on the photo, kind of early versions, analog versions of Photoshop. So in this photo, it's showing where the freeway is going to go. And so you'll see that often. They might touch up a photo. They might, if somebody's eyes is closed, they'll draw in eyeballs, or they'll kind of black out around their heads so that the photo will pop out. So we will see that editing directly on the photo. If it's something that has been used over and over, you might gradually see more and more doctoring. We have a photo of Elizabeth Taylor, and when you look at the photo, it's just kind of blacked out except for her head. And it was just a photo of her that was used over and over and over. And it was actually a photo of her at the premiere for The Heiress with Montgomery Clift. But as the years went by, they were focusing on her and not him. And so he just got completely blacked out at some point. So it's they're interesting artifacts, but sometimes the photos will just have so many markings on them, they might be difficult to use. Here's another example. Here's Robert Kennedy at the Ambassador Hotel shortly before his assassination. The Herald photographers covered the 1984 Olympics. So our photos from the Olympics, I think, are just fantastic. So here's Mary Lou Retton taken by Ann Knudsen. The Herald, the employees went on strike starting in 1967, and they were on strike for a full 10 years until 1977. So that means we tend to have a gap for news stories during that year. And the paper never really recovered from the strike. And so they never switched over to color photography. So this is an all black and white collection. So all of the photos, like from the Olympics even, are taken all in black and white. And then finally, we have a photo on the right of a cat wedding. And I love this photo. A number of years ago, I think we had 10 photographers from the Herald Examiner who had been around in the 70s and 80s. And James Rubseman, who was the photographer who took the cat wedding, he included this in his portion. And he said, this isn't a good photo. It's framed horribly, but it's just so typical of what life was like at the Herald Examiner. You might be shooting Mary Lou Retton at the Olympics, you might be shooting the Academy Awards, or you might be sent off to photograph a cat wedding. So it's an incredible collection. because it is so large, it is the collection that's largely not online. I think we've digitized maybe around 22,000 photos. I mentioned it's around 2 million photos. It is a misleading number. So even though the Herald had their own fabulous staff of photographers, they still got photos from wire services and movie studios and contract photographers. These are all photos we definitively do not have copyright on. So, and they might not, for a lot of the wire service, they might not even necessarily be photos in Los Angeles. And so these are photos that we are never going to digitize because copyright is held elsewhere. So I would say probably 40 to 60% of the Herald collection are these types of photos. Even though it is a massive collection, we do have an index for it. So we are able to navigate it pretty well. And so this is the collection we get asked to search offline most often. Our second newspaper collection we have is the Valley Times. And the Valley Times was published out of North Hollywood from 1946 to 1970, but it covered the entire valley, like in the post-war era when there was just a tremendous amount of growth going on. They were the first photographers in the region to switch from 4x5 film to 35 millimeters so they could take more rapid photos. I absolutely adore this collection. And so here's the Fashion Square in 1962 in Sherman Oaks. So those of you that are familiar with the area, it is an enclosed mall now, so it looks very different. I love this gal on the right who is getting her award for her science project of cholesterol and the hamster. So I frequently will joke that the Valley Times tends to be shopping malls and science fairs and social clubs. So it definitely is this period in the city's history where there was that growth and just a lot of civic engagement, and that's definitely reflected in the Valley Times collection. So they would cover big stories like the 1960 Democratic Convention, but at the same time, if grandma was celebrating her 82nd birthday and you called up the paper, they would send a photographer to grandma's house and shoot the photo and run it. So no story was too small for the Valley Times. And here's just a few more examples. So lots of images of architecture and building throughout the city. This collection, we had made a concerted effort to organize and digitize it. So it now, as of last month, after an 8-year effort, this collection is completely digitized, at least the photos taken by Valley Times photographers. My friends group, Photo Friends, helped raise over $230,000 to hire temporary staff to do this. And we did earn, I think in 2017 or 18, the Los Angeles Conservancy awarded this project a preservation award because there is so many photos of architecture in it. So I just absolutely adore this collection. Here's one of our social club photos. And there's also a lot of civil rights focused photos in the collection as well. So here's just one example of that. And even though the paper ran until 1970, for some reason, our collection only goes up to 1965. So it was owned by the same person who owned the Hollywood Citizen News at the time. In 1970, he declared bankruptcy. It was the largest personal bankruptcy up until that point. The courts forced him to fold both newspapers. So they both folded. The Valley Times archive was auctioned off, and the people that bought the archive eventually sold it to the Security Pacific National Bank, which is how we ended up with it. So I suspect the 1965 to 1970 might have ended up with the Hollywood Citizen News photos, and I have no idea where those photos are. I think my guess is they're in somebody's garage, and they're going to turn up someday, and I hope they come to us. So those are kind of our big collections. We also have a lot of smaller collections by specific photographers. And I always encourage people to get to know our photographers a little bit better because they all have different focuses and do different things. So I'm just going to run through some, not all of the photographers in our collection. So we have Lucille Stewart. And she her collection, we have lots of photos of Curry's ice cream parlors. So they must have commissioned her to shoot various Curry's ice cream parlors around town. We also think that she was the photographer for Mayor Fletcher Bowron. So we have lots of photos of 1940s Los Angeles politics, which is interesting, and photos inside the mayor's office, which we really don't have elsewhere. So she had access that press photographers didn't have. We also have our Harry Quillen collection focuses on Chinatown and China City. And Quillen had been a circus photographer. That was one of the things he did. I think he traveled around with the Clyde Beatty Circus, and his archive ended up with a circus museum that I want to say was in Wisconsin. And so they, took the circus photos, but then had all of these photos related to, Chinatown and China City. And they contacted the library, and that is how we ended up with the Harry Quillen photos. William Reagh was a local photographer who shot the city from the 1930s into the 1990s. When he passed away, the Los Angeles Times in their obituary referred to him as the Ansel Adams of Los Angeles. He photographed the city for such a long period of time that he ended up going back and reshooting areas later on. And so we have a lot of examples of then and now with the William Reagh collection. So here is the exact same corner of 7th and Flower. So on the left, we have a building called the Martz Flats, and then on the right is the Broadway Plaza, which is now, I don't know what it's called now. There's a Macy's there now, and that building, within the last few years had a complete overhaul, so it looks very different now. William Reagh is the one, I think we have around 1,000 photos of his that have been digitized, and he is the one collection that we did purchase. Next up is our Kelly Holiday collection. These were all shot by a man named Howard Kelly. It was Kelly Holiday was the name of the company. And these are all aerial photos. So they're 50s, 60s, maybe some early 70s aerial shots. And aerial photos can be a good resource if you're looking for a specific building, if you're looking for your house and we don't actually have any street level photos, the aerials can be a good substitute, particularly if the building you're researching is located near a landmark. So here we have like the Capitol Records building. Here they shot the focus of this collection a lot of the times will be industry. So they might be shooting like an industrial plant. And then as they were flying back, if he just wanted to finish up the roll of film, he would just shoot what was there. But here's just a neighborhood. So, searching for cross streets using the term aerial might help you find photos of buildings that maybe we don't have kind of spotlighted photos of. And here's just a couple of other just fun photos in the Kelly Holiday collection. We have Disneyland in 1955, around the time that it opened, and you can see how built up Anaheim was not at the time. And Howard Kelly shot a lot of drive-ins around the city. So if you're interested in drive-ins, or if you went to one of the local drive-ins, I encourage you to do a search. And there's some color. There's not a lot of color in the Kelly Holiday collection, but as you can see here, this photo of the Van Nuys Drive-In, there's a little bit. Next up, we have Herman Schultheis. He was a German immigrant who came to the United States in the late 20s to New York. He married Ethel Wishlow. She was from New Jersey, and then the two of them moved here to Los Angeles in 1937. So Schultheis was an amateur photographer. He was also an engineer. He worked briefly at the Disney Studios, and when he and Ethel came to Los Angeles, they explored the city with a vengeance, and he had his camera with him. He took it with him everywhere. And so this is a collection, I want to say like around 6,000 photos, I want to say, of Los Angeles in the between 1937 and 1940. I think, he was a street photographer. It's incredible. We got grant funding. So this entire collection is online. And so I encourage you to check out the Herman Schultheis collection. He shows up in his photos a lot. Ethel was, clearly his muse. She shows up in the photos all the time. And so we kind of feel like we've gotten to know Herman and Ethel. We're all big fans of them in the photo collection. Herman was also a amateur archaeologist, and he unfortunately in 1955 went went on an expedition in Guatemala into the jungles and never came home. His body was found a year later. And Ethel never remarried. And when she passed away, she donated all of her effects to Catholic charities. And when Herman Schultheis worked at Disney, he kept meticulous notebooks of how special effects were achieved on movies like Fantasia, particularly Fantasia, and I think maybe Bambi and Pinocchio. And he had offered to sell his Fantasia notebook to Walt Disney, who passed on it. And so when he died, you know, and the house was being cleared out, they found, you know, this notebook, called a local animation expert, and he came in, you know, he bought all the Disney stuff and also the photographs, and that's how we ended up with Herman Schultheis's photo collection. The Fantasia notebook is on display at the Walt Disney Family Museum if you ever have a chance to go up there. And if you happen to have the Fantasia, I think the Blu-ray at home with you, there is a 14-minute documentary about Herman Schultheis. So he is absolutely fascinating and we adore him. Rolland Curtis, he's another one of our amazing photographers. He was a field deputy for council members Billy Mills and Tom Bradley in the 1960s. And much like Herman Schultheis, he carried his 4x5 camera with him everywhere. And so, you know, he had lots of access, you know, to Los Angeles politics in the 1960s. So it's lots of, you know, city hall events and lots of proclamations, but then he also just shot a lot of community events around the southern central area. So, you know, this is a collection of Black Los Angeles in the 1960s. Here's, you know, 2 examples of 12,000 photos that we have. We've only digitized a little over 170 of that collection, but we have scanned the entire collection. We just need staff to get it up online. So this is a collection that has been completely organized and we are able to navigate it pretty well. And we do have a spreadsheet. So, you know, if you're looking for photos of this and, you know, and there are national people. So here's, Martin Luther King Jr. and we have Bobby Kennedy and we have Shirley Chisholm in this collection, but then it also can go down and just be, you know, just local, the Watts Summer Festival. But it is just an incredible collection that was personally donated by Rolland Curtis's widow, Gloria. Mildred Harris was an armchair historian. She was actually the secretary to a Methodist minister, and she just very obsessively tracked development throughout Los Angeles through from the 1940s through the 1970s. These are all Kodachrome slides. So it's just an incredible, I included this image of the Biltmore Theater where the Marquise is now playing the Cleveland Wrecking Ball Company. They were used often to demolish theaters throughout the downtown area. We lost a lot of theaters during that time period. And they always put like these quippy sayings on the marquees right before they were going to demolish them, which I think is just amusing to an extent, but also just absolutely gut-wrenching. And then here's a photo of not destruction, but the county courthouse being built. And the Methodist minister that Mildred worked for ended up with her photo collection. And when he passed away, his daughter contacted us, and that is how we ended up with it. And then we have Anne Laskey, and Anne, who is a personal friend of mine who used to work for the Los Angeles Conservancy. When she was a teenager, when she was 15, her mom, Marlene, who was an architectural historian, you know, they started this project to document all of Wilshire Boulevard from downtown to Santa Monica. And so on Tuesdays, you know, between late 1978 and early 1979, they would go to a certain section of Wilshire Boulevard, and Annie took all the pictures. They are Kodachrome slides. They are just, it is a fantastic survey of Wilshire Boulevard, because Wilshire is just always being, you know, Wilshire just changes, I think, daily. So it's just an incredible, you know, snapshot of Wilshire Boulevard in the late 70s. And the photo on the right, I love, it's them reflected. I love when the photographers show up in their works. And it's one of my favorite photos. And then finally, we have a collection by Ansel Adams, which you may or may not know about. Ansel Adams was, in addition to his landscapes and his photos of Yosemite and the Southwest, you had to make a living. And so in 1940, he was commissioned by Fortune magazine to shoot the aerospace industry in Los Angeles. They did an entire issue around the aerospace industries throughout the country. And so he shot Lockheed and he shot Douglas. And then he also shot downtown, went up Wilshire, shot Beverly Hills, went down to Signal Hill. And so he shot, I think 217 photos that we ended up with. And, the Fortune ran some of them. And when he was in the 60s, early, I think 1962, he was packing up and he was moving. He came across the photos and he personally contacted the library to see if he wanted them. And my understanding is Ansel Adams only ever twice donated photos. His images of the Manzanar internment camp, he donated to the Library of Congress because he thought they were incredibly significant. And his photos of Los Angeles, he donated to the library because he thought they were garbage. And we have the original donation letter where he says, it was a cloudy day. These aren't very good. If you don't want them, put them in the incinerator. We did not put them in the incinerator, which I guess we still had in 1962. We did appraise the entire collection of 217 negatives and 135 contact prints at $150 total for his taxes. This collection has been completely digitized, so you can search for Ansel Adams and that will get you there. And so that is an overview. I could probably go on for at least another 3 hours, but that's an overview of some of the collections within our collection, certainly the major ones. To see what we have digitized, you can go to tessa.lapl.org, which I'm going to just do a quick demonstration for you shortly. If you have questions for me, that is my email. Right now, photo staff is working from home, so we're not able to do offline searches. So I'm going to kindly request don't send us searches for offline photos because unfortunately we're not going to be able to accommodate you right now. But just keep an ear out, and as soon as Central Library is open again and we're up and running, we're always happy to search our collection to try to find things that are not represented in the online collection. So I will stop sharing there. And do we want to take look at questions, or should I go into the Tessa demonstration?
We could take a couple of questions actually that is not related to the online search. Do you want to do that? And then we'll go over to the demonstration.
Yeah.
So I made some notes here. So one question about was photos of residences. Would they be sorted by address?
If we know the address, yes. So I certainly always try to put addresses in it. So yes, but again, it's super hit or miss. I mentioned we were the second public library in the country to start digitizing photos. This was in 1998. Denver Public beat us by a few months. And that's really great that we started so early. The problem is it was really early and it was before best practices were developed. And so, and it was really a vanity project at the time, whereas now, digitized collections, they're a core service that we provide. And so at the time, I think, this predates, my tenure with the library. They would just, I think, kind of grab, whoever. So they weren't necessarily trained catalogers, and like creating, meaningful metadata. It's really a skill, and it's, I don't even think it's necessarily a skill I have. Like, I'm not a photo cataloger. So, even early on, maybe they weren't doing a lot of research. So now if we see a street and we see a number on it, like we'll do a deep dive and try to figure out what street it is and what the address is. And if so, yes, it's going to be there. But, if we don't know, again, I would do searches for cross streets. You can just pop in, the street that the residence is on, look for the aerial photos, and then also just pop in that term, unidentified residence, and, maybe you'll hit pay dirt. You just never know.
Okay, and then there were a couple of people that were interested in volunteering for archiving and digitizing photos. Is that an option? I guess it's not now with COVID, but in normal times.
So in terms of digitizing, that is not an area that we need. I mean, we need help with metadata, but again, it needs to be people that have been formally trained in cataloging. In terms of scanning, scanning is never the issue with digitization. So I haven't sent any photos up to be scanned in over 3 years. We still have a backlog of probably 15,000 photos. So scanning is not the issue. Scanning's really the quick part of digitization. It's the metadata, but that's something that really needs to be done professionally. When we're in the building, I sometimes will take on volunteers to maybe help with archival processing, but people need to really stop and think, like, do you have the time to come down, like a minimum of 4 hours a week? Do you want to come downtown? So, when I first took over the photo collection, I said yes to every volunteer. And it just, I took the time to train people, and they often would realize that it was more of a commitment than they could actually fulfill. So, I tend to be a little bit hesitant, but if you're really interested, you can contact me when we're open again, because right now, we just don't have any volunteer opportunities available right now.
And then we get the question too, what is the process for deciding which collection get digitized and added to TESA?
Yeah, there's a variety of things that go into it. Early on, the approach was to digitize the things we were getting asked about all the time. So, people want the photos of downtown, and they want the photos of Hollywood and Bunker Hill and, the Black Dahlia and the Manson family. So, early on, it was like very much a cherry picking approach just to get those things online that people wanted. Now it tends to be, if we can get grant funding. So in order to, because we always need extra help. So, the Valley Times, I decided, like, the Herald is just so big that I don't know that we can take that on all at once. Valley Times, which, was like a mere 40,000 photos, like that was something that we could handle. And so we decided, yes, it was, it was worthwhile. There are images, well, I feel like all images are of interest to somebody. So I never consider one image more important than the other, but we got the grant funding. And so that definitely, steered that. But again, if we do come across photos, like at one point I kept getting asked for photos related to the Black Panther Party, which we had some. And it was like, well, we have all these, I'm getting asked for them, let's try to get them online. So it can be a variety. It just depends on like the staffing, the grant funding, and just staffing in general, what's available.
Okay, so we have a few more questions. I suggest, because we're getting close to 3, and I think both Christina and I are happy to go over 3 o'clock, but I suggest, Christina, that you make a little demo of the online system.
Yeah.
And then we will continue with some Q&A after that.
Okay. Are you seeing Tessa? Yes.
Yes, we see it.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is our our digital portal, Tessa, which is what we call it. It is named after Tessa Kelso, who was one of our fabulous early city librarians. And through this website, you can access all of our homegrown digital collections. So these aren't databases that we subscribe to. These are all of the collections that we have and that we've digitized. And so I'm going to take us over to collections. And all the various collections are listed here. You do have the option to just put in a search and start searching all digital collections. Although I don't usually recommend it, but just an FYI, so when you search it, it is going to search everything you see here, except for these last 2. Our city and street directories run on a platform called Rescarta. the California Index, which, if you're doing local history research, I highly recommend this, runs on a platform called InMagic. The rest of the collections here run on a content management system called Content DM. So when you search all collections, it'll search everything but those two. I prefer to just focus on individual collections. I think you can refine your searches much better. And so here is the photo collection. We have, our individual collections, which I had gone over a little bit today, or you can just start searching them. Anything listed as the photo collection is available for ordering and use. So, if you want to order a photo, we have instructions, we have the fee schedule here. Normally we do make in-house prints. We're able to make really nice prints, as small as 8 by 10 and as large as I think like 44 inches on the short side. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that right now. So we are processing photos from home, or processing photo orders from home. We're limited to 300 DPI TIFF files, which we'll have for everything. In most cases, we'll have 600 DPI TIFFs. We're not able to do anything higher because that requires rescanning. But that option is there, and instructions, and we are definitely doing that, processing photos right now. I'm just going to go into the photo collection and do a quick search for Central Library and just show you what comes up. And so we have, our order number, which is important if you're looking for a photo. This is also unique to every photo. So if you kind of want to bookmark photos, that's the number to keep in mind. The title, a date, and then we have our different sub-collections are listed here. So you can get an idea for what you're looking at. Content DM defaults to a 50 thumbnail display. I usually open it up to 200. And so, when searching, there's a number of things that you can do to kind of help refine your searches. So I did a search for Central Library. It's bringing up 631 results, which, like most of them look fairly relevant, but they might not all be relevant. So just briefly, I'm going to go into this photo of 9th and Grand. And this came up as a result because here in our subject headings, we have the word central for Central Business District. And here in our description, we have the US Bank Tower known as the Library Tower. So this is not a photo of Central Library at all. And so one of the things you can do to refine your search term, it's not going to, Content DM won't, if you put it in quotes, it's not going to read that. So what I recommend is going to an advanced search, and then you can do the exact phrase. And then we can do the search for Central Library. And it takes us down to 584 results, which I think is right. We do have a lot of photos of Central Library in there. You'll notice on the left-hand side over here, all of these different collections are listed, but we're only searching the photo collection. And one of the things you may have noticed in the advanced search, right here, it gives you the option to search by date. And I am going to tell you now, don't do it. Do not use the search by date. It's not going to work. With our photo collection, a lot of our images either don't have a date, they're undated, and we've left the date field blank. So when you search by date, you're going to miss out on those. And for photos where we have a roundabout date, we have used the term circa, circa 1942. And the date field Content DM is just set up to only read numbers. So all of those circa photos are not going to turn up. So I really recommend not searching because you're just going to be missing out. So what you can do, kind of the workaround for that, as long as you're just searching the photo collection, is you can sort by date. And so I'm just going to click on the word date. And now it's sorted it. And so the order that it's going to sort it into is all of our undated photos. And I'm just going to scroll down. And then it's going to get into our dated photos chronologically. Keep going. And then at the end of it, it'll get into the circa dates. And so that is a good way to search. So there's all of our circa ones. So that's the workaround for searching by date. Yeah, it might take some scrolling and you'll look through the thumbnails, but I do think it works pretty well. And then the one other tip I'm going to share is utilizing subject headings for when you get too many searches. And I always recommend, go broad and see what you get. But then if you're getting too many, then you need to refine. So I did a search for Marilyn Monroe and I got 236 results. And I know, it's giving us pretty relevant results up front, but I know later on we have a series of photos of the ambassador and there is a historical note that talks about Marilyn modeling there or something. So you're gonna end up with a lot of results that maybe aren't relevant. And so in our advanced search, I recommend searching by subject because we do use subject headings and those can be very helpful for pinpointing photos. And so when I do that, we've gone down to 53 results. So we've gone from, all the results where Marilyn Monroe shows up anywhere in the record, and it might be in some, vague historical reference, to photos where she is the focus of it. And so I do recommend that. I do recommend utilizing and becoming familiar with subject headings. When you're looking at photos and you come across something really relevant, you will have the option to actually click. So down here, we have the Marilyn Monroe subject heading. But if you're not familiar with cataloging, if you click on this, it is going to give you just the photos of her. It's not going to give you the photos that might have the subject heading like Marilyn Monroe homes and haunts, or, Marilyn Monroe, portrayals. But when you click on that subject heading, it's going to default you to searching for all of these here. And if you look, you're not seeing those sub-collections anymore, and you're not able to sort by date. So that's why subject headings are fantastic, but that's why I won't click on this. What I'll do instead is just copy and do my advanced search. Go back, so I'm out of all of them. I'll do the advanced search and then I'll copy and paste. And if I do it as an exact phrase, hopefully that'll work. And there's my results. So those are just, a couple of workarounds. Every database has its quirks and has its issues. So if you just, play around with it, you also can add fields. So you can do and or searches, or you can, I could have done with Central Library, search for Central Library, but, none of the words US Bank. So it's a pretty powerful database to search and should help you refine. But the date thing, I think, is the most important thing to know. And so I'm going to stop there. And that is just a very, very broad overview. But again, if you have trouble finding things online, need help searching, you're always welcome to shoot me an email, crice@lapl.org. Always happy to help you out. And so that is the end of my formal presentation. If we have other questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Yeah. Do you have time for a few more questions?
Oh, sure.
All right. So I'm doing a little random order here. There are two questions that are a little bit related, and I'm going to ask them both. So one is about the copyright holder for the Herald Examiner collection is not you, right? So the question would
it is, because because the Hearst Corporation donated, the Hearst Corporation was the one to donate the Herald Examiner to us.
Okay.
So they did relinquish the rights to us. So we do maintain rights for the images taken by Herald photographers. So those ones we do, and those are the ones we digitize. For the wire service, those we don't. So, people can research those, but if there's a photo, from the Associated Press that they want to use, like maybe we have it, but they need to go to the Associated Press to get permissions to use it. If it's like International Newsreel, I think, like that collection was purchased by Corbis, that's now owned by Getty. They're going to have to go, deal with Getty. with it.
For
So
you, for usage rights.
usage rights and for reproduction,
Right,
yeah, and
right.
sometimes like AP can't find, maybe AP or Getty can't find the actual photo, even though it might clearly, and the wire service photos are very clearly marked. We need a representative like of the Associated Press to say it's okay for us to reproduce it.
Okay, but that, with that said, if you run into an image like that on Tessa, it's marked there, it's highlight, or it's noted there that you need to do this extra.
In theory, we shouldn't be digitizing it.
Oh,
So,
okay. So then, okay, got you. So then it shouldn't
yeah,
be there.
yeah, and not to say that things haven't slipped through the cracks over the years. I had a photo a couple of months ago. Somebody wanted to order it, and then when I looked at it, it clearly was an outside photographer. It was not a Herald photographer, and I found the photographer's website, and they had that photo on their website. So at that point, we told the patron, okay, you need to contact them, and I'm going to delete it off of our website. So we try to not post those photos online.
And I know this information is on your website, but maybe you want to clarify. We have one question here that says, if we find a photo that we want, can we copy and paste it into our own files? So basically, the low resolution images that you have on the website here, what can be done with those?
I mean, you certainly can. They're able to be downloaded. We don't watermark them. At this point, if you want to use them on like a non-commercial website, like an educational website or a blog, if it's just like a personal, or if you want to post it like on your personal social media account, we're not talking about organizations, but like personal, we don't charge for that, but please credit us. That is such a huge problem with, this goes for institutions and this goes for photographers where everybody's just posting everything and not crediting. So, we're utilizing a lot of our resources to preserve these collections and to digitize these collections. And we're super happy with you, sharing them. But please give us the credit. If for no other reason, then somebody might see it and go, hey, that would be great for my book. And then they have a really hard time figuring out where the source is. And that's actually been a huge part of my job the last few years is people contact me and they're like, I saw this photo online. Can you help me find it? Even if it's not ours. So I just can't stress enough how important it is to, just credit, like we're on Twitter, just, tag us on Twitter. We have a Facebook account. So please just credit us. And if the photographer is listed in the record, like please credit the photographer. So, if it's being used for commercial purposes or being used in books or things, that are going to be made available for purchase, we do have that whole fee scheduled there.
All right. So then actually, as you were talking here, there is one more copyright issue or copyright question. That is, wouldn't the copyright on the older pictures already have expired? And I know we could have a whole copyright lesson here. But
there is a difference, but for copyright between things that have been published and things that have not been published, and we don't always necessarily know what's been published. I will clarify that the fees that we charge are considered administrative maintenance fees. So, we don't refer to them as licensing fees, and our city attorney said it's okay for us to charge even things that we know are in the public domain. We still charge these fees. We rely on them so much. This is how we purchase all of our digitization equipment. This is how we purchase all of our archival folders. Like, I don't actually have a budget. I rely on the fees that we bring in for usage. And compared to some of the other places, our fees, like for my Jane Russell book, I had to get a photo from Getty Images, and one photo for an academic press book was over $400. So the fees that we charge really help support the photo collection. So we do charge them. In some of our collections we have copyright. So like Rolland Curtis, we definitely have copyright. And like I said, Hearst relinquished the rights for us. Other collections, it can be a big gray area. So that's why our fee schedule is considered an administrative maintenance fee.
Right.
And please don't yell at us. if you don't like the fee.
And thank you for the reminder here from Claire. There was a question earlier here if any of the photos were destroyed in the 1986 fire of the Central Library.
Yeah, so none of the photos were impacted immediately. So like when the actual fire happened, and none of them were impacted. What ended up happening with the Valley Times collection is they were stored in metal filing cabinets, and condensation developed. And so a number of them did get damaged, get water damaged. And they were pulled out, and they were laid out, and they were dried out, and they were put back in the drawers. And then it happened a second time. And so again, this predates me, but yeah, my understanding is we probably lost a couple hundred of the Valley Times photos. That collection, the clippings, the actual clippings were stored with the photos. And so a lot of the time, and we still have examples of this in the collection where the clipping is just stuck to the emulsion on the front of the photo. So, I guess all things considered, I hate to think of the photos that were lost. Every lost photo breaks my heart. But I think it was just a couple of hundred that was in the aftermath of the fire.
All right, and then I have an older question here from a little bit ago, and you might have brought it up, and I didn't pay attention because I was answering some other things online here. If you want to donate photos to the collection, what's the procedure there?
Yeah, so if you go, when you go into the photo collection, there is a list of FAQs. One of them is about donating, so it gives the parameters. So it needs to fit in with our scope, which is life in Los Angeles, which is pretty broad. We only take original photos, so like original prints or negatives. We don't take like computer copies of photos. We don't take scans of photos. We're starting to get into like born digital, but if you have photos that you're like, you're digitizing your family photos and want to send the files, we don't accept that. So this is an actual, analog historical photo archive, and what you see online are just digital surrogates of what we actually own. But if you have original photos that you're looking for a home for and they fall within the scope, you can reach out to us, preferably not right now, just because I'm at home and I've had, people have been mailing photos to my house. So I don't know if I want to continue that. So if you're able to hold on to them for a little bit longer until we're open again, that is preferable. But we are always happy to take photos as long as they fall within the parameters, just with the understanding that we have so many collections and such a huge backlog that they might not get digitized for quite some time.
I think you might have touched on this earlier, but how many photos of the entire collection has been digitized and are available or viewable online?
We're at a little over 133,000 that are online.
And the whole collection is?
I mean, we estimate, like 3 something million, but again, 2 million of it's the Herald, and I would say 40 to 60% of that is stuff that's, we don't have the copyright on. So, we like to throw around the big number, but it is a little bit misleading. So, there are a lot of photos that have not been digitized. The bulk of it is the Herald, though, and so that's going to be like very specific news stories. But I think a lot of just the Security Pacific and a lot of the really kind of high interest things have been digitized. So it does tend to be, very specific things that people are looking for when they ask us to look offline.
And here's another question, and I guess this varies, but do you have negatives of the photos as well, or just prints? And how are they stored?
Yeah, we have all types of formats. So with the Herald Examiner, we didn't get anything pre-strike, which is 1967. So my understanding is that the photographers went to the drawers and grabbed them all and brought them home. And we actually had the son of one of the photographers donated some of the 4x5 negatives back to us. We did get the 35 millimeter negatives for the Herald from roughly 1979 to 1989. And so, those are stored. We have a not a climate controlled room, but a temperature controlled room. So that's where those are stored right now. We do have, glass negatives that are also stored there. And we have a really small set of nitrate negatives from the WPA collection, and those are in a freezer. So we have like a wide variety of formats. Rolland Curtis is almost all 4x5 negatives. And so those are stored in the temperature controlled area. And a lot of that, like Herman Schultheis, I believe was nitrate, and we had copy negs made of that. In a lot of Security Pacific, we have copy negatives of, because for 20 years, that's how people got prints, was that we made copy negs. So a lot of original negs from the Herald, 35 millimeter, but for the most part, it's very heavily a print collection.
Right, we have 2 questions left, and one is, are there photos you have difficulty identifying, like location, people that you see in the photos? Do you have time to to do research, or?
We do. We have lots of those types of photos. We certainly do. Yeah, like the newspaper photos usually have a great deal of information, which is great. And then we'll have these other random donations. A lot of Security Pacific, it's hit or miss how much information came with it. Yeah, we have gone down some research holes. We absolutely have. I don't know. I hope nobody from library administration, I don't know if they would be upset or not to know sometimes how much time I have spent. But I do encourage you to go online and do a search for the North Hollywood Playhouse, because man, I think I spent like a week researching it, because it was just identified as like theater somewhere. And I spent a huge amount of time. So I'm very proud of the North Hollywood Playhouse records. So we try. Nothing, it's very frustrating for me to have a photo online that just has, a very vague description, because it's just not going to be found. So, the unknown residents, man, if you want to dive in and see if you can figure out where those residences are, I would love that, because I really hate having the words unknown and unidentified in the photo database, but they are certainly there.